Okay, this video applies to people that are creating vertical navigation, so more like this design here or any variation of that. Now, we started making our navigation in the traditional way inside of an unordered list and then using classes to drill down so that if we made another unordered list, it wouldn't take on this look. But I've decided, after seeing all the great options that the W3 school has, that we're going to get rid of this so that if you want to copy and paste code from the W3 schools, it's a lot easier. You don't have to keep adding the class to it. So what we're going to do, and this is what you should be doing as well, is we're going to get rid of all three of these nav list items inside of here, and we'll clean up the code along the way. So that's one of three. And this will take care of the third one. And then we also want to get rid of this class here. Now you can see all the CSS is breaking down, but we are going to do just like the W3 schools does and write the code directly to the ULs and the LIs. And we'll be looking at a lot of examples in the W3 schools, so you'll see what I mean. Before we go in there though, let's make the CSS work. So what we need to do is go into our main CSS, and instead of these classes, we need to write directly to the ULs and the LIs. So this class was applied to the UL, so now we'll just change it to plain old UL. This was applied to anchors inside of the list items, and as you can see as I'm writing this is starting to come back to look like it did before. Now let's look a little bit closer at the reason why we did that. So if we go into the W3 schools and we look at the CSS and then navigation bar, we can see that there are a ton of great examples in here. And you can see that when they write for this stuff, like right here, it's just directed right at the UL and so on. A lot of stuff. So there's list item anchors that are inside of list items. So now the question might be in your head, what if I want to put a list item on my website, but I don't want it to have all this stuff applied? I think the easiest way to combat that is once we're done, but we'll wait until we're all done, you can go in here and any of these things that apply only inside of the navigation, we can just go ahead and right in front of each one of these, just simply go NAV and a space. And so then what that'll mean is that this only applies to unordered lists that are inside of or wrapped around HTML tags nav, like what we did. Then we would go down here, we would do the same thing, place NAV in front of this and so on. So I'm going to Command Z that out because I don't want to do that right now. And let me just clean up my code here a little bit. I like the code so that before the item starts, there's a space, and then the brackets come right after all of our definitions. Like in this case, there's two definitions, then a space, then the next, then a space. It makes it a lot easier to troubleshoot. So if we look by example here on the W3 schools, vertical navigation bar examples, we can get in here and we can see what this one does. Now it's a little bit different than my design, but all I have to do is modify the things that matter. So let's first start out with giving it some space. And so what they do, or giving it like more of an appropriate space, I should say. So what they do is right in the UL, they give it a width. Now we'll have to play around with this as the design process continues, but let's go ahead and put that in our UL. So you can see what's happening now is this is the actual width of our navigate. Well, I take that back. That's the actual width of our unordered list. The actual navigation, the surrounded by the nav tags, it takes up this whole area now. And because I put in a background color earlier of red, that's what we're seeing now. What we'll do is we'll modify that CSS to get us much closer to this using these colors. So first thing is, it's got a little bit of space between them and they're centered. If we look back on the W3 schools, we can see the only thing that mentions margins other than 0, which we did this up at the top of our CSS. So margins padding is what we're looking for. And so what they do is they put it right in the link, the A tag. So in other words, any A tags that are a list item have this applied to it, and so what they have is this shorthand notation for the padding, which I'll explain a little bit more in a second here, but let's get this done. So Command C, we'll paste that into our list item anchor CSS. And what you should notice is, yeah, there we got a little bit more breathing room there. And here is where I mentioned earlier that we put in margin padding for all of these tags right here. Now these are arbitrary numbers. They might not work with my design, but I can always change them later. But just so we understand what this means here, let's look back at the W3 school under padding. So we go to padding here. And everything you wanted to know about padding, but were afraid to ask. This is the way CSS would be written in Dreamweaver, and we'll see an example of that in a minute. No shorthand, but just to give you an example, if you go down here far enough, it shows you what the shorthand means. And also it becomes kind of intuitive once we look back into Dreamweaver. So if we go into Dreamweaver, go to the CSS developer, make sure we are on the main CSS and that we are looking at the selector for, and we'll just slide down here until we see the appropriate one right there, and then we get down to the padding by selecting layout, scrolling down to padding, we can see that it has 8 pixels of padding on the top and 16 on the sides. So keep an eye over here. If I change one of these to give us a little more padding, say on the right, you can see that it now writes it out instead of the shorthand notation. But I'm going to keep it simple for now. Command Z, go back to where that was. And then to align our text centered, we could play around in here, or I think what's probably a better learning experience is go back to the W3 school and just keep looking through the examples until we see something that's pretty close to what we want, and then go in and look at how they did it. So we need to go back to nav, DSS navigation bar, and then go down and we see, okay, the links are centered and there's borders. Now if your design called for borders, you could see how to do that in here. We will go ahead, go in here, click on try it yourself, and we'll see that, yeah, that's all they did was just put a text align center to the list items. So we'll copy, paste that into our CSS. And I just realized we have not written an actual list item just by itself. We have list item anchor. So I'm going to copy all of this just to make it easier. And we'll put that, it makes most sense to put it just above list item anchor. And then you can see I have the borders in there, but my design did not call for borders, so I'm going to get rid of them. While we're on this example at the W3s, I think it makes good sense to just point a couple things out to you. Let's say that you did have borders and you were having trouble figuring out exactly what's what. Remember that you can go in here and change things and then click run and it'll show you what you're doing. So if you're wondering like, why do they have a border on the list item and on the list and on the unordered list. Go ahead and remove one and see what happens. So if I go here and I get rid of this, hit run, I can see, oh, okay, so having it for the UL puts it all around it, but having it for here just at the bottom note. So I'll refresh the browser and notice that that was just for the bottom. And then what is this one doing? Well, get rid of it and see. But basically what it's doing is it's saying list item, and then this is a special notation. Last child means the last list item thing. Don't put a border of bottom. And basically the thinking is, well, it's already got one from the UL. So if we put another one, it's going to change the appearance of it a little bit. It's pretty minor, but if we click run, you'll see now it looks really thick, almost like a drop shadow there. Now let's take care of the case of when someone hovers over the options. So it's taken care of right here, list items, anchor, hover. And that's really all you would need, but if you don't want it to hover when they're over the active button, then you add this saying, which we haven't even written this yet, but when we do write for the active button, we don't want the hover to work. So we'll copy all of this and we'll paste it just below our list item anchors. Now my design did not call for a background color, but the color changing to white of the text makes sense in my design. So I'll just get rid of this line of code right there. And now we need to take care of the active link so that when we're on the actual home page, we can tell. And in my design that I'm roughly going for, it was just changing it to this color. So how do we do that? Well, first let's make up the name of our class, and we'll just follow what the W3 schools are doing and call it active. In fact, we'll go to their site and just grab it. Okay, so here it is, a list item with the class of active. Copy, paste right after the list item active, or I'm sorry, list item anchor. Now we have list item anchor that's active, and now we need to write the code for that in the HTML. So switch over to the source code, go to the HTML. The active page on the index would be the home page. So right after the A tag, we do a space, type in class, let Dreamweaver help us. We'll hit enter, puts in the space there. It realizes we wrote a class called active, and voila, we're getting closer here. We just got to change the style. So we go back to the main CSS, and I just need not the background color, but just the color of the text to change. And I'll steal that from my H1 tag up here. So copied that, and then we'll paste that in here. You can see as far as this section is concerned, we have what we want. We have the hover. When we're on the actual page, does not change, but it does have the color that we want. Now if we click on the portfolio page, how come that didn't change to the blue color? The reason is we have to go into the CSS for each of those pages, and when we're on the portfolio page, we need to change the link to just a hashtag, and then we have to put in the class. So, but we're not going to worry about that now because those pages are just dummy pages. A couple optional things to think about, and maybe think about taking the advanced version of this class. You can go to the video number 5 and see me just quickly mention Bootstrap and also talk about one way of using media queries. But on the W3 site, they give an interesting one. Like, what if you had your side navigation, but if someone was viewing on a tablet, there wouldn't be enough room. So you wanted to switch to this, and then when they go a phone to this. Take a look, shows you about media queries.